Hi there. Thanks for downloading the Forecast Pro demo. My name's Eric Sabatis, and I'm with Business Forecast Systems. First off, I very much appreciate you taking the time to take a closer look at Forecast Pro. If you're watching this, it's likely you've already taken a look at some of our quick tour videos or other resources available on our website. But whether you have or not, my real goal here with this demo today is to give you a closer look into Forecast Pro TRAC. So hopefully you can better understand how Forecast Pro might apply to your business and how we can help improve your forecasting. Before we begin with our sort of deep dive into Forecast Pro TRAC, I'd like to first give you a little background on our company, Business Forecast Systems. The company was founded in 1986 with a tool that was developed to create easy, accurate, and automatic forecasts. Now, the automatic forecasting is still very much the bread and butter of Forecast Pro. However, the product's evolved so that it now encompasses, many elements of forecast analysis and management in addition to just the forecast generation. And so now, Forecast Pro is very widely used. We have about 35,000 users around the world, and we're also very widely distributed. So, in addition to our English versions, we're also available in a number of other different languages, including Chinese, French, German, and others. Now, our primary focus is software. We make the Forecast Pro product line. We offer consulting and training for Forecast Pro. Though, we consider ourselves forecast experts here, and so in that regard, we also offer kind of education and training in the general area of business forecasting, in addition to our product-specific training. Now let's talk about Forecast Pro. What is Forecast Pro designed to do? Well, it's designed to give us accurate, statistically based forecasts automatically. And the way we do that is by using our built-in expert selection system, which allows you to feed Forecast Pro your sales or demand histories, and based on that historical information, or the patterns and trends in that historical information, Forecast Pro will automatically build you forecasts for all of your items at the click of a button. So for example, we could generate hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of forecasts in just a couple seconds. Now, of course, from there, there's a variety of different ways that we can manipulate and manage those forecasts, whether that's accounting for events and promotions, viewing and dissecting our information at various aggregate levels, or whether that's accounting for new products, such as product line extensions or replacement products. And of course, we also offer ways of simply, okay, now I have that baseline or that statistical forecast. How can I simply look at those numbers period by period and decide where I might need to make manual adjustments, as well as document those adjustments to keep our process as transparent and efficient as possible. Forecast Pro comes in 3 different flavors: Forecast Pro XE, Forecast Pro Unlimited, and Forecast Pro TRAC. Now, what we talked about in the previous slide, for the most part, is available in all 3 solutions to one degree or another. Forecast Pro TRAC is our flagship product, and it really builds on our other 2 solutions in various ways. For example, I can view my forecasts and history in multiple units of measure. Maybe I'm currently forecasting in my base units, and I want to see how that translates into dollars or some other form of currency. Very easy to both view and convert over to those units in Forecast Pro TRAC. In addition, I can very easily flip around my product hierarchy in Forecast Pro TRAC. For example, if I'm currently forecasting SKU by customer, I can easily flip that around and view totals for SKUs across all customers. Forecast Pro TRAC also offers accuracy tracking and exception reporting. So for example, if I'm forecasting out 12 months on a rolling basis, Forecast Pro TRAC will archive those forecasts over time, so I can go back and compare those forecasts that I created in the past to actuals as they come in for whatever lead time that I'm interested in. And so in addition to being able to view that information in reports like waterfall reports, I can also flag exceptions based on that information. For example, just give me a list of all the items where I was off by 50% or more the previous month. Forecast Pro TRAC also offers ABC categorization, The old rule that 80% of my revenue comes from 20% of my items. In that case, I'd probably want to focus my efforts on those 20% of my items, or my A items. Forecast Pro TRAC allows you to import that sort of categorization either from some external source if you already have these kind of classifications, and it can also do it for you automatically based on volume. And lastly, Forecast Pro TRAC allows you to import other information into the software that might help you make your forecasts. So for example, that could be things like open orders or current inventory, or it might simply be forecasts that were generated outside of Forecast Pro that you want to view alongside Forecast Pro's forecast in order to make adjustments or come to some sort of consensus between competing forecasts. So now let's take a look at Forecast Pro TRAC. Here we are on my desktop. I'm going to go ahead and open up the software. As I mentioned, it's an out-of-the-box solution, and so I'm just going to pop it open just like any other application on my computer. Now the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to read in some data so that we can forecast based on that information. Now Forecast Pro can read in historical data from a number of different sources. We can pull it in from a spreadsheet like Excel or a comma-separated values file. It could be a flat file like a text file, or we can connect directly to a database via ODBC and pull in from a query, view, or table in that database. For our example though, I'm going to stick with Excel. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a file to read in. Here you can see I have a list of Excel files in this directory, and so I'm going to pull in data for auto parts. These are things like spare parts, tires, etc. Next I'm going to hit the second button to forecast the historical data. And lastly, I'll hit the third button to create my forecasts. And so just kind of a general note about the interface and how we move around Forecast Pro. We can click on and off all the views in Forecast Pro using these buttons here at the top. So for example, I can view my data graphically. I have a grid where I can look at my forecasts by period and make adjustments to those forecasts. And I also have a number of reports. Now what I'm really just trying to show you here is I can have multiple views open simultaneously, and as you'll see in a second, as I move around the data on the left here, all these views will synchronize according to what item or group I am currently examining. For now, let's just take a look at the graph in this report here at the bottom. And let's start by just kind of taking a look at this data that we have brought into the software. Right now, what we're looking at on the graph is aggregate sales in units for everything, every item or every forecasted item that I've brought into Forecast Pro. And so the green line is my historical sales, while the red line is my forecasts or my projected sales. This data, however, we can break it down by salesperson. So here we have 4 salespeople. I can then go down another level to the warehouse, which is segmented by region. And lastly, on the lowest level, we have our individual part. And so in this way, we generally bring in data in some sort of hierarchical structure in Forecast Pro. However, this hierarchy is completely up to the user. You can have any number of levels in your hierarchy, and likewise, the criteria for the levels can be whatever you want. So it could be something like customer, or location, or region, or all of those things. It's completely up to you. Now, when I hit this forecast button at the top, Forecast Pro analyzed each of these items individually, chose an appropriate forecasting method, and created all these forecasts automatically. Now, if we just kind of scroll through all the data, you can see we have about 2,000 or so items. And as you saw, in about less than a second, Forecast Pro created forecasts for all of them at the click of a button. First, let's talk about Forecast Pro's expert selection. How did Forecast Pro forecast all these items automatically? Let's start by examining this report here at the bottom for our first product. Now this report is called the Forecast Report, and it's going to give us all information on how did Forecast Pro choose a model for me, what are all details of that model, and of course, what are the forecasts themselves. Now the first section here is called Expert Analysis. This is going to explain, in plain English, how did Forecast Pro choose a model for me. And so our expert selection really works in 3 steps. First is a series of rules to analyze your data. For example, how many years of data do you have? What is the nature of the data? Is it very high volume? Is it very low volume? There are about 217 of these rules in order to narrow down the choice of models to certain families. You can see based on these rules, it narrowed down the choice to 2 model families. Now the second step is to take those approaches and test them on your data and see which one's going to work better. The way this essentially works is if we went back a certain number of periods and tested these 2 models against that sample, which one would have been more accurate? So in this case, as an example, if we went back 6 months and we built an exponential smoothing model, and then we also built a Box-Jenkins model, which one would have been more accurate? And so based on that test, Forecast Pro is going to make a selection. And so in this case, it's going to use an exponential smoothing model. And so the third step is to take that choice and optimize and fit it to your data. And so all details of the model that it chose are listed here. In this case, it built a non-trended but a seasonal model. Now don't worry if some of these models don't sound familiar to you. Forecast Pro is not designed for statisticians. We will of course give you all details and as much statistical information as you want, but really the software is primarily designed for business forecasters. So you can use the software effectively whether or not you're intimately knowledgeable about these statistical models. Now below this section we're of course going to get arguably the most important part of our forecasts, which is the forecasts themselves. And so in this case we brought in our data by month, and so here we can view our forecasts by month as well as some quarterly and an annual total. Now from here there are really a couple different ways that we can manipulate or manage our forecasts. One way is we can always manipulate the statistical methodology behind how our forecast was generated. And that can be as simple as choosing a different model, or we can do things like build events into our model to account for those as part of the statistical forecast, as well as various methods to forecast new products. The other major way that we might manipulate our forecast is to go and look at our forecast numbers themselves and perhaps make adjustments to those forecasts, as well as document and keep track of why those adjustments were made. So let's talk about that second piece first. Now that I've created a forecast automatically in Forecast Pro, how can I just look at those numbers that Forecast Pro gave to me, decide if they make sense, and if need be, make some adjustments? Very easy to do that. I'm going to close out of these 2 views here, and I'm going to open up the override view. This is called the override view. Here we can examine our forecasts by period and make adjustments if need be. Now what we're looking at here is on the first line we have our statistical or our baseline forecast. We then have some space where we can make adjustments to the forecast. And on the last line we have our final or our adjusted forecast. What is our forecast now that we've adjusted it in some way? Now the view has some nice features and some flexibility. So for example, we can view our history in this grid. So if we want to view our historical sales in the past by month alongside our forecasts, we can do that. We can also have up to 10 rows for adjustments. So right now we currently have 3. If I wanted to add or remove some, I can do that from the view. We can also name these rows whatever we want to sort of set up this view according to how I run my business. So for example, a common approach might be to name these rows after certain people. Like one row for our demand planner, maybe another row for sales and management. Or another common approach might be to name these rows after common drivers of demand. Or you could do both. In this example, I'm going to name them after maybe different people who have roles in our forecasting. So I'll assign my first row to our demand planner, maybe my second row to a salesperson, and then maybe I'll assign my third row to management. Now that I've done this, I can make adjustments in various ways. For example, I can adjust up and down by a percentage. For example, if I wanted to bump up demand for the fall and winter by a certain percentage, I could do that. Here I'll bump it up by 15% for October, November, and December. I can also add comments onto those to keep track of why I'm making these changes. In addition, I can increment or decrease the values by just certain numbers of units. For example, if sales wanted to come in here and bump up the value for, say, November, I could do that. Oops. And likewise, I can always just come in here and type things into the grid manually. For example, management may have the final say. They could come to sort of a consensus between the two adjustments. Now we can make adjustments at any level of our product hierarchy. Currently, this is very simple. I am making adjustments at the lowest level of my product hierarchy. Once again, this is part number by warehouse by salesperson. And so that means that at these higher levels, for example, at the Chicago North level, we're simply driving the forecasts up or down if we had been making adjustments the other direction. Now we can make forecasts at any level of our hierarchy. For example, I could make an adjustment at the Chicago North level, or I can make an adjustment at the salesperson's level. For example, maybe Greg feels that these numbers look too low, and so he could come in here and simply bump everything up by 5%. Forecast Pro would take those adjustments made at the group level and automatically disaggregate them to all of the products within the group. In that way, Forecast Pro is very robust and powerful. It will reconcile all the adjustments that you're making, regardless of where you're making them. And so that gives you a lot of control over how you plan and adjust the forecasts that you're creating. Now, there are some other things we can also do in this view. For example, if you recall, Forecast Pro TRAC also lets us view our forecasts in terms of different units. And we can also bring in other information into the software. So these are two things I'm going to demonstrate for you here in this view. For example, if I wanted to view my forecasts in terms of sales dollars as opposed to just my base units, I can do that here. In order to do that, I simply brought in an average price for each of my part numbers. And now I can turn that on in this view. And so, for example, here, I've tacked on a row that shows me my forecasts in terms of dollars. And as I make adjustments, I can see how those adjustments play out in terms of my other units. Now I can also import additional information into this grid, and that can really come in any flavor, whether you want to import things like open orders or current inventory, or whether you want to import things like other forecasts so that you can compare them to the forecast you have currently. Here I'm going to import an example of both those things. I'm simply going to choose a file I want to import from. And so here you can see, in addition to now viewing my forecast in dollars, I also have two additional rows. One that shows my current orders, and another that shows a forecast that I may have from sales. Now I can do a bunch of things with this information. I'm able to view it here alongside the rest of my information in the grid so that I can use it to help guide me while I'm making adjustments to my forecasts. In addition, I can make calculations off of this various information that I've brought in. For example, if I wanted to show a row that showed me my available to promise as a difference between my forecast and my current orders, I can do that very easily. I simply add a row. For example, I'll call it available to promise, and I just define it as a formula however I want. For the most part, we support formulas just like Excel. So for example here, I'll define this as my forecast minus my current orders. And I can cause this whole row to be defined as such, thus showing me the difference between my current forecasts and my open orders. I can also graph any of this information. For example, if I wanted to see graphically the difference between my salesperson's forecast and my current Forecast Pro forecast, I could display all that information simultaneously on the graph. For example, if I come up to the graph, I can simply turn on the two forecasts, and here I can see how the two forecasts differ. If you recall, there are several different ways that we can manipulate the forecasts in Forecast Pro. And so what we just went over is, all right, here are my forecast numbers. How can I examine those numbers and make adjustments where I need them? As well as look at my forecast in different units and maybe bring in some other information to help me make those adjustments. Some other ways that we can manipulate the forecast would be in terms of manipulating the statistical forecast in some way. And that can really fall into several different categories. You know, that can be as basic as, okay, Forecast Pro chose a model for me. What if I simply want to choose a different forecasting model? Or maybe I want to account for events, whether those are recurring or one time, as part of my model. And there's also some methods of forecasting new products rather than simply dictating the forecast in the form of adjustments in this grid. Now, the most obvious way that we can manipulate the statistical forecast is by simply changing the model that Forecast Pro chose for us. So expert selection gave us a model choice. Maybe we want to change that. Very easy to do that in Forecast Pro. For example, here's an item that's giving us a flatline forecast. Forecast Pro did not detect any seasonality here automatically, and it's recommending that we don't use a seasonal model. However, maybe I know this item to be seasonal, and I want to force a seasonal model on here. Very easy to do that. I simply choose the item that I want to change the model for, and choose the model I want to build. And so here I've now forced a seasonal model on this product. I can also account for events and promotions as part of my statistical forecast. And those really come in two flavors. I can account for one-time events, things like business interruptions that might cause a gap in my data. Or I might want to account for recurring events. I know when I run certain promotions, how can I build that in as part of my model to help facilitate the automatic forecasting? First, let's take a look at an example of a one-time event. Here's a product that we've been selling for a number of years, and demand for the most part has been increasing. Now, here you'll notice in February of 2012, I have a period with no sales. Maybe that was a period when I ran out of stock and I wasn't able to make any sales, but that's not normal for February. You can see last year that we, in fact, did have a number of sales. What I've done here is I've built in an event for a one-time event that's going to account for that business interruption. And when I apply it, you'll see it smooths out my forecast and prevents the business interruption from skewing my automatic forecast. We can also account for recurring events as part of our statistical forecast. For example, I'm going to open up another instance of Forecast Pro and read in some other information here. In this case, data for mouthwash. I'm going to read it in, forecast it, and show the graph. Now here we have two different bottle sizes of mouthwash with some very clear spikes in demand throughout the historical period. And Forecast Pro is building us a seasonal model. And so for the most part, it does a good job capturing these patterns. For example, here in January, you can see we usually have a spike in demand, and Forecast Pro is capturing that as part of the automatic forecasting. But maybe we're running price promotions throughout the year, but they don't fall in the same periods every year. So we know when we run the promotion, but Forecast Pro doesn't necessarily have that information. What I can do is I can build a schedule of events. For example, here I have a schedule called Price Specials, where I'm going to tell Forecast Pro all the times in the past where I ran this event, as well as when it's going to happen again in the future. So Forecast Pro can generate what the impact of that event is on my demand and use that information to generate my forecast. And so if I apply this event schedule to my item, I can capture those events, and here you can see when I plan on running that event again in the future. Forecast Pro also has a number of ways of dealing with new products, products with limited or even no history. I'm going to open up another example here in another instance of Forecast Pro. Just a very simple example that has a product that has no data. So we haven't even launched this product yet. How do I forecast this item? Well, I can always come into the override view and dictate the forecast, but that's a little hands-on. So let's think about other ways we can do this. Well, one approach that we have available is called the by analogy approach, where I would expect this launch to look very similar to perhaps an item that I launched in the past. What I can do is I can define a sort of profile or shape that I expect the forecast to assume. Generally, I'll take this from a similar product that I've launched in the past. And so what I can do is I can apply that profile to this item that has no historical data. In addition to doing that, I can specify how many units I might expect to sell over a given period of time. So maybe I expect to sell 500,000 over the course of the next year. Let's let Forecast Pro distribute that number over the course of the shape that I expect the forecast to assume. We can also forecast from any level of our data hierarchy. So if we jump back to our auto parts example, by default what Forecast Pro does is it generates the forecasts at the lowest level of our hierarchy. In this case, the part by warehouse by salesperson. So Forecast Pro looked at each of these part numbers individually and generated all the forecasts at that level. And so what that means is that at these group levels, for example, Chicago North, the forecasts we're looking at here are really aggregates of all the forecasts generated below. But what if I want to forecast from a group level and allocate downward? Well, it's very easy to do that. For example, if I wanted to forecast based on the aggregate level history at the Chicago North level, and then push those forecasts downward as opposed to the other way around, I can do that. And so this is a great approach when you might have very volatile data or otherwise unreliable data at a very low level, whereas at a higher level you might have more stable, reliable data. But what does this mean for new product forecasting? Well, it allows you to leverage multiple items' histories in order to forecast a new product. So I'm going to go ahead and open up one more instance of Forecast Pro here. In this case, bring in data for cold products. These are things like cough syrup, inhalers, lozenges, etc. And so let's just focus on this first group for cough syrup. Here you can see very clearly it is seasonal data. We sell much more cough syrup in the fall and winter as opposed to the spring and summer, but we're getting a flatline forecast. Now, why is that? Well, we have a bunch of new products that we're forecasting. So here you see we have 5 SKUs. We've been selling all of them for 6 or 7 months or less, and therefore Forecast Pro is just generating a flat line. Now these products have replaced some old ones. So they're replacement products for these other SKUs that are discontinued, but we still have their histories available in the software. What we can do to account for these flat lines is we can, rather than using the limited data we have at the lower level to generate the forecasts, we can leverage the group level data available at the top and allocate the forecast downward after capturing those patterns. And so you'll see if I apply a top-down here, we generate the forecasts to capture the seasonality clearly visible at the top level and push those forecasts down to the items below it, thus leveraging both new and old items' histories in order to forecast new products. We've talked about a number of ways in which we can create and manipulate forecasts in Forecast Pro. Before we move on to things like reporting and tracking accuracy, let's just recap what we've gone over so far. When we read data into Forecast Pro is going to create statistical forecasts for us automatically for all of the items that we're bringing into the software. And so in this case, we use the auto parts example where you can see we created a forecast for each of these SKU by warehouse by salesperson combinations. From there, we can manipulate the forecast in various ways, whether that's changing the statistical model that Forecast Pro chose, whether that's accounting for events and promotions, whether that's forecasting new products or from different parts of our forecast hierarchy. Or we can come into this grid view and make adjustments directly to our forecast numbers, view our forecasts in different units, and we can also bring in other information into the grid. There are a number of different reporting options available in Forecast Pro TRAC. But first, just a general note about reports and views in Forecast Pro. As I've gone through the demo, you've probably noticed that I've been right-clicking a lot. Now, when you do that in Forecast Pro, it'll invoke this context menu that'll give you a series of options corresponding to what you're looking at. And one of those options will always be a design box. And what this will let you do is customize any reports that you want to add information that you might want to see or remove information that you might not be concerned with. So for example, here on this formatted report, you can see I can add or remove really any element of the data that I may or may not want to include. Now, in addition to being able to customize all of the reports available, I can also instantly get anything out that I want to Excel. And so if for example, I wanted to get this formatted forecast report out to Excel, if you recall, this is the first report that we looked at. It'll include the graph, information on how Forecast Pro chose a model, all details of that model, and of course the forecasts themselves. I can simply right-click this report, save it out to Excel, and now if I open it up, just to show you what we're looking at, you'll see that I get the graph at the top as well as the formatted report as a spreadsheet below. In addition to the formatted forecast report, we also have various spreadsheet style reports available to us. For example, if we want to just simply get a list of all the adjustments that we've made in this Forecast Pro session, I can do that in the override report. And so here you can see I have an entry or a record of every single override or adjustment that I've made, including what I've changed the forecast to, any formulas that are present, and any comments associated with those adjustments. Now, all reports like this are filterable just like Excel. And you'll see this familiar icon here in the top right corner where I can turn them on and filter and sort the report. So for example, if I only wanted to see adjustments that were made by sales, I could filter the report down that way. Use this report as I need, or I can simply save it out to Excel if I want a record of those. You can also add or remove any element of the data in Forecast Pro to these spreadsheet style reports, so you can filter and sort based on that criteria. For example, here in the item report, if I wanted to just get a list of the items that have seasonality, I could very quickly do that using the filters in Forecast Pro. And so here, now I just have a list of the items where Forecast Pro is generating a seasonal statistical forecast. And I can also use this report as a navigational tool by simply double-clicking on certain items, and it'll jump me straight to that item. This example with seasonality is just one thing you can do with these reports. Really, you can filter and sort based on anything you want, depending on how you want to move around and organize your data in your work session. Now, arguably the most important report will be the numeric output. And so this is generally the report that you're going to send out to your larger system or your ERP. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have about 35,000 users around the world, and virtually all of them are going to be using different ERPs and different systems in one sense or another. And so this report really strives to be flexible in order to accommodate whatever system you happen to be using. So just like any other report, we can come in here and design it however we need in terms of what fields are present, what data is present, general formatting and orientation. And we can also write out to various formats, including writing out to a spreadsheet, writing out to a flat file, such as a text file, or writing out to a table in a database that we're connected to. So for example, if I want to just get this out to Excel, I could save the forecasts. And so when I do so, it'll prompt me to save the spreadsheet. If I'd chosen an ODBC connection, it would prompt me to name the table that I want to write out to. In this case, I'll save out the numeric output and just quickly show you what that looks like. But generally speaking, what you see in the report in Forecast Pro is what you'll get when you output it. And so here, you can see in a very simple report, we simply have the item in question and our 12 months of forecasts going out 1 year. At this point, we've walked through the steps of what could be a forecasting cycle utilizing Forecast Pro. We generated forecasts using historical data, we manipulated and maybe made some adjustments to those forecasts, and then we sent those forecasts out to our planning system. Forecast Pro TRAC is also designed to accommodate and streamline an ongoing forecasting process. We can save these sessions as what we call Forecast Pro projects, much like any other file on our computer, so that we can save and restore our work later. For example, I could come up to File, choose Save, and save this project. If I then closed and then later reopened that same project, it'll bring me right back to where I left off, including what windows I had open, any adjustments I may have made previously, etc. These projects have several advantages for the user. For one, since they operate just like any other file on my computer, it's very easy to share and collaborate on these projects. Here in this directory, you can see I've saved a number of different projects. As long as someone has access to this directory, they can open up these projects in Forecast Pro, work on them, make adjustments, and get reports. These projects are also designed to be used on an ongoing basis. For example, let's say we generated this project this forecasting cycle. We created some forecasts, adjusted them, and then sent out the results to our planning system. Next period, we're going to have some new actuals or new historic data that we want to bring into the software. If you recall, this project was generated from some other file or table. In this case, we generated it from a spreadsheet. We would go to this spreadsheet or table or flat file, whatever it was, update it with our new actuals, and the next time we opened up this project, Forecast Pro will recognize that the data has been updated and prompt us to recalculate the statistical forecast while still applying any adjustments or changes we may have made previously. And so when I do that, you'll see that we move forward in time while still maintaining any adjustments I may have made in previous periods. In Forecast Pro TRAC, this has a third advantage as well, and that is the ability to track accuracy. Attached to these projects, Forecast Pro will be archiving the forecasts that you're creating over time so you can compare them to the actuals as they come in. Here's an example of the auto parts project, except this is a project that we've had ongoing for a year. So each month of the past year, Forecast Pro TRAC has archived the set of forecasts that we created at that point in time, so that now we can go back and compare all those forecasts that we created in the past to actuals as they've come in. First, let's look at the top report here on the screen. So here's a simple bar graph examining our first SKU 10001-AX. What we're looking at is a comparison of our 1 month out forecasts in the blue versus what actually happened in the green. So back in December, this blue line represents what we forecasted for January versus what actually happened in January. Or in this next block, here is what we forecasted in January for February compared to what actually happened in February. Now we can compare any lead time we want. Currently we're just looking 1 month out here versus actual, but we can compare any lead time, and we can also compare multiple lead times simultaneously. So here I'll turn on our 2 and 3 month out forecasts as well. The view at the bottom is what we would refer to as a waterfall report, or what is sometimes known as a staggered report. This is a fairly standard way of looking at forecast accuracy over time for various lead times. On the first row, we have what actually happened. Here's our sales history for the past 6 months. Down the left side, we have different points in time from which we created a set of forecasts. So back in December, we forecasted for January, February, March, all the way out to June. Or in January, we forecasted from February out to June. Here we now have a quick visual comparison for what did we project versus what did we actually sell. You'll notice that diagonally, Forecast Pro has color-coded the different lead times to make the report easier to read. In addition to being able to view our projected sales versus actual sales, we can also make comparisons in terms of error, so just deviation between actual and forecast, as well as percent error. Forecast Pro also stores multiple forecasts that we can compare in this report. If I return to our grid view for just a second, Forecast Pro is actually storing 2 different sets of forecasts. It's storing our original statistical forecast, or our baseline, and it's also storing our final adjusted forecast. In the waterfall reports, we can toggle between those 2 things. If I right-click here, you'll see I can toggle between statistical and adjusted, with the idea being, let me see where my adjustments might be adding value, or where maybe are they not. These reports are also available at any level of our hierarchy. Currently, we're looking at this particular SKU sold at this warehouse by this salesperson, but we can get them at any level that we want. For example, as I click around, you'll notice the report updates automatically, so that we can also get it for any SKU, as well as at the warehouse level, the salesperson level, or even the total aggregate level. In addition, Forecast Pro offers some consolidated statistics for the lead times as a whole. So here at the bottom, for example, we can see that for our 1 month out forecasts, over the past 6 months, we were off by an average of about 26.85%. We can also get these reports in different units and in different configurations of our hierarchy. So for example here, if I collapse this a bit, You can see that below each salesperson, they have a number of warehouses, but some of these warehouses overlap. What if I want to get a consolidated report for one of these warehouses across all of my salespeople as opposed to warehouse by salesperson? In Forecast Pro, it's very easy to do so. I can simply promote these levels up or down and swivel it around, sort of like a pivot table in Excel. So here it's going to rebuild the report for me in this altered state. And if I dig back down through this hierarchy now, you'll notice that the warehouse level is now above the salesperson level, so I can get a consolidated report for that accuracy as opposed to the other report. We can also examine all this information in a more spreadsheet style report, which we refer to as our exception reports. And these really serve two purposes. First, I can compare information for many different items at once, all in the same view. And since I can filter and sort these reports, just like Excel, I can segment this really however I want to. In addition, because I'm listing many items at once, I can set exceptions or thresholds to basically filter and sort reports automatically for me. For example, only show me a report that shows my items where I was off by 50% or more last month. Forecast Pro has 6 different exception reports available. We can do things like compare our current forecasts to our historical data, compare our current forecasts to forecasts we've created in the past. We can flag things outside of a certain range. And of course, we can also compare our forecasts we created in the past to actuals as they've come in, or our history. In this case, I'm going to set up a report that shows me my forecast I created for last month from the month prior. And I'm simply going to show all of the errors associated with last month. And so here you can see I have the item in question, the date of the forecast itself, what actually happened the same period, as well as the difference and percent difference between those two. Now once again, we are comparing multiple different kinds of forecasts. So you'll see we also list the statistical forecast as well as the difference and percent difference between those two. In this case, you'll notice that the statistical forecast and the final forecast are the same. That's simply because we did not make adjustments for this particular project. Now if I want, I can filter and sort based on any of the information in this report. For example, if I just wanted to sort this by percent error, I could do that, and Forecast Pro will give me a list of those. And just like all the other reports that we looked at before, we can use this as a navigational tool and jump directly to the items that are listed here. As discussed, we can also set thresholds to flag exceptions based on those thresholds. So using the example I mentioned earlier, if I wanted just a list of the items where I was off by 50% or more last month, I can set those thresholds here and get a much smaller list of items so I can know where to focus my attentions this period. In addition to the exception reports and the hierarchy, there are also other ways of segmenting your data in Forecast Pro. We can bring in custom filter fields, so you can really populate these reports with any fields that you might want to filter and sort on. A popular example might be to bring in custom ABC rankings, for example, if you classify your items according to high volume versus low volume. We could turn those on in this report and then filter and sort based on that criteria. These sort of filters can really be anything you want them to be. This is a common example. However, you could filter and sort based on really anything that you wanted to. We can also do this sort of ABC ranking on the fly for you in Forecast Pro. So if you don't currently do any classification, or if you just wanted to see another classification generated more dynamically, in Forecast Pro you can choose how to weigh the different volumes, whether it's based on forecasts or history, and also how to group up your items based on those volumes. In this example, based on the forecasts, we'd be grouping the top 80% of our volume into the A group, the next 15 into the B group, and the last 5 into the C group. And that would let me filter and sort these reports based on that information. And once again, we can always save these reports out to Excel very easily by simply right-clicking and saving this to Excel. And of course, the same goes for our tracking reports. If we wanted to get this formatted report out to Excel, I can also do that by simply right-clicking and choosing Save this page to Excel. Let's recap what we covered throughout the demonstration. Forecast Pro provides accurate, statistically based forecasts automatically based on sales history using our expert selection system. From there, you can adjust the forecasts and keep track of those adjustments to keep your forecast process as transparent and efficient as possible. You can also analyze and manage your forecasts using a variety of reports, including reports that allow you to track forecast accuracy over time. And finally, Forecast Pro easily bolts on to your ERP or demand planning system. In addition to being easy to use and easy to get up and running, Forecast Pro is also one of the most affordable packages available. During the demo, we primarily focused on our flagship product, Forecast Pro TRAC. The prices listed here are perpetual single-user licenses, so these are not recurring fees. You'll notice that there are two different kinds of licenses listed here, a forecaster license and a collaborator license. The forecaster license is what we looked at throughout the demo. It does everything from reading in data and generating statistical forecasts to manipulating and adjusting those forecasts to getting reports. The collaborator license cannot read in new data, so therefore it can't create new statistically based forecasts. However, you could open up a pre-saved session, view the forecasts, and adjust the forecasts as well as get reports. So for example, if you have a salesperson who doesn't need to worry about pulling in new data, but they do need to view and perhaps adjust the forecasts, they could use a collaborator license in conjunction with your forecaster license. If you're interested in purchasing multiple forecaster licenses, we also discount for more than one license. The list price here is $9,000 for one user of Forecast Pro TRAC. However, if you're interested in two, it drops down to $7 each. 3 would be $6, up to a maximum discount of about half price if you're interested in 5 or more forecaster licenses. If you have an idea of what you need and you'd like a tailored quote, please just reach out to us and I'm happy to provide that for you. Once again, thanks for taking the time out of your day to take a closer look at Forecast Pro. In terms of next steps, please contact us if you're interested in getting more information, discussing your business needs specifically, or if you want to get a live demonstration using your own data. If you're ready to order Forecast Pro, please just look at the description under this video for links to order forms or other literature. Once again, my name's Eric Subatis. My contact info is listed here on the slide, so if you'd like to talk more about your business and how we can apply Forecast Pro to your forecasting, please get in touch right away, and I'm happy to talk about that with you. So thanks again, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.